Good evening. Tonight we will be examining the intricate details of the Victorian postal system in Great Britain. This will be a thorough exploration of postal regulations, stamp denominations, postal box placement protocols, and the methodical organization of delivery routes during the reign of Queen Victoria. We will not be discussing exciting tales of adventure or dramatic historical events. Instead, we will focus exclusively on the administrative procedures, bureaucratic frameworks, and systematic regulations that governed the movement of mail throughout the British Empire during the 19th century. Please settle in comfortably as we begin our journey through the remarkably unremarkable world of Victorian postal administration. The penny black stamp was introduced on the first day of May in the year 1840. It measured precisely 20.5 millimeters in width and 24 millimeters in height. The stamp featured a profile of Queen Victoria based on a portrait created for her coronation medal. The printing process utilized a method known as line engraving. Each sheet contained 240 stamps, arranged in 20 rows of 12 stamps each. The paper used was manufactured specifically for this purpose and included a small crown watermark to prevent forgery. The adhesive applied to the reverse of each stamp was composed of potato starch and water. The exact ratio was carefully regulated by postal authorities. Clerks were instructed to apply moisture to the adhesive using small sponges that were to be dampened, but not overly saturated, with clean water from designated containers. The color of the penny black was, as its name suggests, black. However, postal authorities soon discovered that the black ink made it difficult to see the red cancellation marks applied to indicate the stamp had been used. This presented a minor administrative challenge. Consequently, in the year 1841, the color was changed to red-brown. This new stamp became known as the penny red. The penny red maintained the same dimensions as its predecessor, 25 millimeters by 24 millimeters. The portrait of Queen Victoria remained unchanged. Between 1841 and 1879, numerous variations of the penny red were produced. These variations included different paper types, different watermarks, and different perforation measurements. Collectors would later categorize these variations using an elaborate classification system involving letters and numbers. For instance, stamps printed between 1841 and 1854 are classified as imperforate, meaning they lacked the small holes along the edges that would later facilitate separation. Postal clerks were required to use scissors to separate individual stamps from the sheet. This process was time-consuming and required careful attention to avoid damaging the stamps. The perforation of stamps began in 1854. The perforations were measured according to the number of holes per 2 centimeters. The most common perforation measurement was 14, though variations of 15, 15.5, and 16 also existed. Each perforation gauge required specific machinery. The machinery was maintained according to strict schedules outlined in postal service manuals. Maintenance was to be performed on the first Monday of each month, unless that Monday fell on a holiday, in which case maintenance would occur on the following Tuesday. The uniform penny post, established in 1840, revolutionized postal rates by introducing a flat fee regardless of distance. Prior to this reform, postal rates varied considerably based on the distance a letter would travel and the number of sheets of paper it contained. Under the new system, any letter weighing half an ounce or less could be sent anywhere within the United Kingdom for 1 penny. This simplification represented a significant administrative achievement, though it introduced new challenges regarding weight verification. Post offices were equipped with specialized scales manufactured to exacting specifications. These scales were required to measure weight in increments of 1/16 of an ounce. Each scale was to be calibrated monthly using standardized weights provided by the postal authorities. The calibration process was documented in ledgers. Each entry included the date of calibration, the name of the postal clerk performing the calibration, and any deviations from the standard measurements. If a deviation exceeded 1/32 of an ounce, the scale was to be removed from service and sent to London for repair. Letters exceeding half an ounce, but weighing less than 1 ounce, required 2 penny stamps. Letters between 1 ounce and 1½ ounces required 3 stamps. This progression continued in half-ounce increments up to 16 ounces, at which point different regulations applied. Parcels weighing more than 1 pound were subject to a separate rate structure. This structure was outlined in the Parcel Post Act of 1883. The Act established 11 weight categories, each with its own rate schedule. The first category included parcels between 1 pound and 3 pounds. The rate for this category was 3 pence for delivery within a 5-mile radius of the posting office. For delivery between 5 and 15 miles, the rate increased to 6 pence. For delivery beyond 15 miles, the rate was 9 pence. The second category included parcels between 3 pounds and 7 pounds. Rates for this category were 6 pence, 9 pence, and 1 shilling, corresponding to the same distance brackets as the first category. Similar rate structures existed for each subsequent weight category up to the 11th category, which encompassed parcels between 35 and 40 pounds. Parcels exceeding 40 pounds could not be sent through the regular postal system and required alternative shipping arrangements. Postal clerks were required to memorize these rate structures. Training programs typically lasted 6 weeks and included written examinations. Clerks achieving a score below 70% on the examination were required to undergo an additional 2 weeks of training before retaking the examination. The Postal Service also offered registration services for valuable items. Registered mail required a fee of 2 pence, in addition to regular postage. Items sent as registered mail were recorded in a special registry book at the post office of origin. Each registry book contained pre-numbered pages. The clerk would record the sender's name, the recipient's name, the destination address, and a brief description of the item's contents. The sender would receive a receipt containing a corresponding registry number. Upon arrival at the destination post office, the item would be recorded again in that office's registry book. The recipient was required to sign for the item, and their signature would be recorded adjacent to the entry. These registry books were to be preserved for 7 years before being transferred to regional archives. The placement of postal boxes, also known as pillar boxes or letter boxes, was governed by detailed regulations set forth by the General Post Office. These regulations addressed not only the physical specifications of the boxes themselves, but also the precise criteria for determining appropriate locations. The first pillar box in the United Kingdom was installed in the Channel Islands in 1852. The design was based on proposals submitted by the novelist Anthony Trollope, who was employed by the Postal Service as a surveyor. The cylindrical design proved practical and was subsequently adopted throughout Britain. Early pillar boxes were painted green. However, in 1874, the color was standardized to red. The specific shade of red was designated as Post Office Red and was produced using a particular mixture of pigments. The exact formula was documented in Postal Service technical manuals. Each pillar box was required to stand at a height of 4 feet and 6 inches from the ground to the top of the posting aperture. The aperture itself measured 7 inches in width and 1 inch in height. This allowed for the insertion of standard-sized letters while preventing the insertion of packages exceeding postal regulations. The thickness of the cast iron used in pillar box construction was specified at 1/4 of an inch. This thickness provided sufficient durability while maintaining reasonable weight for transportation and installation purposes. Each box was manufactured with a capacity to hold approximately 300 standard letters before requiring collection. Placement regulations stipulated that pillar boxes should be installed at intervals not exceeding half a mile in urban areas. In rural areas, the interval could extend to 2 miles, provided that the location offered convenient access to the majority of residents within the service area. When selecting specific locations within these service intervals, postal surveyors were instructed to prioritize sites offering maximum visibility and accessibility. Preferred locations included street corners, the fronts of public buildings, and areas adjacent to commercial establishments. The surveyor was required to prepare a detailed site assessment report for each proposed pillar box location. This report included measurements of pedestrian traffic, proximity to existing postal facilities, and an evaluation of potential obstructions such as trees or other street furniture. Once a location was approved, installation required coordination between the Postal Service and local municipal authorities. Permission was necessary to affix the pillar box to the pavement or roadway. In some jurisdictions, this permission required approval from town councils, a process that could take several months. The physical installation process followed a standardized procedure. A foundation consisting of concrete measuring 18 inches in depth was poured and allowed to cure for no fewer than 14 days. The pillar box was then bolted to this foundation using 4 bolts, each measuring 3/4 of an inch in diameter. After installation, each pillar box was assigned an identification number. This number was stamped onto a metal plate affixed to the rear of the box. The identification number consisted of a letter designating the postal district, followed by a 4-digit numerical sequence. Collection times were posted on a small enamel plate mounted on the front of each pillar box. In urban areas, collections typically occurred 6 times daily on weekdays. The standard collection times were 7 o'clock in the morning, 10 o'clock in the morning, 1 o'clock in the afternoon, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 7 o'clock in the evening, and 9 o'clock in the evening. On Saturdays, the final collection occurred at 6 o'clock in the evening. On Sundays, only 2 collections were performed at 10 o'clock in the morning and 6 o'clock in the evening. These times were subject to minor variations based on local circumstances, but any deviation required written approval from regional postal administrators. Maintenance of pillar boxes was conducted on a quarterly basis. Maintenance personnel were responsible for inspecting the structural integrity of the box, ensuring that the lock mechanism functioned properly, and confirming that the posting aperture remained unobstructed. Any rust or damage to the paint surface required remedial action. Minor rust spots were to be treated with wire brushing and touch-up paint. If rust had penetrated through the cast iron, the box was to be removed and sent to a workshop for comprehensive restoration. The interior of each pillar box was fitted with a canvas sack suspended from hooks. This sack collected posted items. During collection, the postal worker would unlock the box, remove the full sack, and replace it with an empty one. The full sack was then transported to the nearest sorting office. The organization of postal delivery routes represented a complex administrative undertaking. Each route was carefully planned to maximize efficiency while ensuring that mail reached recipients in a timely manner. In urban areas, postal districts were subdivided into delivery walks. Each walk was assigned to a specific letter carrier who was responsible for delivering mail along a predetermined route. The planning of these walks involved detailed consideration of street layouts, building density, and the average volume of mail for addresses along the route. A typical urban delivery walk encompassed approximately 600 delivery points. A delivery point was defined as any address to which mail might be delivered. This included private residences, commercial establishments, and institutional buildings. The Postal Service maintained detailed maps of each delivery walk. These maps indicated the precise sequence in which streets were to be traversed. Letter carriers were instructed to follow these routes exactly, deviating only in cases of street closures or other exceptional circumstances. The standard procedure required the letter carrier to begin at the sorting office, where mail had been organized according to delivery walk. The carrier would load the mail into a leather satchel specifically designed for this purpose. The satchel featured multiple compartments allowing for organization of mail by street. Upon departing the sorting office, the carrier would proceed directly to the first address on the route. Deliveries were to be made in the precise order indicated on the route map. The carrier was expected to maintain a steady walking pace, completing the entire route within the allotted time. Time allocations were calculated based on an assumed walking speed of 3 miles per hour. This calculation included allowances for the time required to sort mail at each delivery point and to ascend stairs in multi-story buildings. For buildings exceeding 4 stories in height, an additional time allowance of 30 seconds per story was added to the route calculation. Letter carriers were issued watches to ensure adherence to schedule. These watches were inspected weekly by supervisory personnel. If a watch was found to deviate from the correct time by more than 2 minutes, it was to be sent for repair, and the carrier would be issued a temporary replacement. In rural areas, delivery routes were considerably longer and more complex. Rural letter carriers often traveled 10 to 15 miles per day. In some remote areas, routes could extend to 20 miles or more. Rural carriers initially traveled on foot, but the introduction of bicycles in the late 19th century improved efficiency considerably. The Postal Service issued bicycles to rural carriers beginning in 1896. These bicycles were manufactured to Postal Service specifications and painted in the standard post office red. The bicycles featured a reinforced front basket capable of carrying up to 30 pounds of mail. Carriers were responsible for the maintenance of their bicycles and were required to report any mechanical issues to their supervisors. Minor repairs, such as the replacement of inner tubes or the adjustment of brakes, could be performed by the carrier. More significant repairs required the bicycle to be sent to a designated repair facility. Rural delivery routes were reviewed annually. Postal inspectors would accompany carriers on their routes to assess whether the route could be completed within the allotted time and whether any adjustments were necessary due to changes in population or road conditions. If an inspector determined that a route had become too lengthy, it could be divided into 2 separate routes, necessitating the hiring of an additional carrier. Conversely, if a route had become shorter due to population decline, it might be combined with an adjacent route. Weather conditions presented particular challenges for letter carriers. Regulations specified that deliveries were to be attempted regardless of weather, except in cases where conditions posed a genuine risk to the carrier's safety. Supervisors were authorized to suspend deliveries in cases of severe storms, flooding, or heavy snow accumulation exceeding 12 inches. When deliveries were suspended, mail was held at the sorting office until conditions improved. Upon resumption of deliveries, carriers were to prioritize the delivery of accumulated mail before accepting new items for delivery on their routes. Letter carriers were provided with uniforms beginning in 1893. Prior to this date, carriers wore their own clothing, though they were expected to maintain a respectable appearance. The introduction of standardized uniforms enhanced the professional image of the Postal Service. The uniform consisted of a dark blue tunic with brass buttons, matching trousers, and a peaked cap. In winter months, carriers were issued heavy woolen overcoats. The uniforms were manufactured by contractors, selected through a competitive bidding process overseen by the Postal Service Procurement Office. Each carrier was issued 2 complete uniforms per year. Worn uniforms were to be returned to the Postal Service and were either refurbished for a reissue or disposed of according to established procedures. Carriers who failed to maintain their uniforms in good condition could face disciplinary action. The sorting of mail within postal offices followed rigorous procedures designed to ensure accuracy and efficiency. Large urban post offices employed dozens of sorting clerks, each responsible for specific aspects of the sorting process. Mail arrived at sorting offices in canvas sacks collected from pillar boxes and receiving desks. Upon arrival, each sack was logged in a receipt book. The clerk would note the time of arrival, the identification number of the pillar box or collection point, and the approximate volume of mail contained in the sack. The contents of each sack were then emptied onto sorting tables. These tables were constructed of wood and measured 6 feet in length and 3 feet in width. The surface was divided into sections by wooden partitions, creating compartments for different categories of mail. Sorting clerks worked standing at these tables. Their first task was to separate letters from other items such as newspapers, parcels, or printed matter. Each category was subject to different handling procedures and delivery schedules. Letters were further sorted according to destination. In a large city with multiple postal districts, letters would first be sorted by district. Clerks would examine the address on each letter and place it in the appropriate compartment corresponding to its destination district. After this initial sorting, letters destined for each district would be subjected to a secondary sorting process. This involved organizing letters by delivery walk. Each delivery walk had a designated compartment, and clerks would distribute letters accordingly. The sorting process required clerks to possess extensive knowledge of street names and address ranges within their jurisdiction. Training programs for sorting clerks lasted 8 weeks and included memorization exercises and practical sorting tests. Clerks were expected to maintain a sorting rate of no fewer than 40 letters per minute. Supervisors would periodically observe clerks to ensure they maintained this standard. Clerks who fell below the expected rate could be assigned additional training or, in persistent cases, transferred to other duties. Accuracy was paramount. Missorted mail resulted in delays and required additional handling. Each sorting office maintained error logs documenting instances of missorted mail. Clerks with excessive error rates faced disciplinary measures. Quality control procedures included random inspections of sorted mail. Inspectors would select a sample of letters from each clerk's work and verify that they had been sorted correctly. If more than 2% of the sampled letters were found to be missorted, the entire batch would be resorted. Sorting offices operated on strict schedules coordinated with collection and delivery times. Morning collections would arrive at the sorting office by 8 o'clock, and sorting would commence immediately. Sorted mail needed to be ready for carrier dispatch by 9:30 to ensure that morning deliveries could be completed on schedule. Afternoon collections followed a similar pattern. Mail collected at the 1 o'clock collection would arrive at the sorting office by 2 o'clock, be sorted by 3:30, and be ready for afternoon delivery by 4 o'clock. Evening collections were sorted for next day delivery. Mail collected after 7 o'clock in the evening would be sorted overnight and prepared for inclusion in the following morning's deliveries. The organization of sorting offices reflected the hierarchical structure of the postal service. Each office was led by a postmaster who held ultimate responsibility for operations. Below the postmaster were assistant postmasters, supervising clerks, senior clerks, and junior clerks. Each position had defined responsibilities and reporting relationships. Promotion from one level to the next required demonstrated competence, satisfactory performance evaluations, and the passage of written examinations. Postal Service regulations outlined conduct expectations for all employees. Punctuality was strictly enforced. Clerks were required to arrive at least 10 minutes before their scheduled shift to allow time for preparation. Late arrivals were noted in personnel files and could impact promotion opportunities. Breaks during shifts were regulated. Clerks were permitted a 15-minute break during a 4-hour shift and 2 15-minute breaks during an 8-hour shift. Break times were staggered to ensure continuous operation of the sorting office. Communication within the sorting office was conducted through written memoranda. Supervisors would post notices on bulletin boards regarding procedural changes, scheduling adjustments, or other matters of importance. Clerks were expected to review the bulletin board at the beginning of each shift. Monthly meetings were held to address operational issues and to discuss performance metrics. The postmaster would review statistics regarding mail volume, sorting accuracy, delivery times, and customer complaints. Clerks were encouraged to suggest improvements to procedures, though implementation of suggestions required approval from regional administrators. Record-keeping was an essential function. Each sorting office maintained numerous ledgers documenting various aspects of operations. These included logs of mail volume, records of employee attendance, inventories of supplies, and registers of registered mail. These records were inspected periodically by postal inspectors from regional headquarters. Inspectors would verify that records were maintained according to regulations and that all required documentation was complete and accurate. Deficiencies noted during inspections required corrective action and were documented in official reports. Throughout the Victorian era, stamp designs underwent various modifications, though changes were implemented conservatively. The primary design element, the profile of Queen Victoria, remained constant, but subtle variations occurred in border designs, denominations, and background patterns. In 1855, the introduction of stamps featuring different denominations required distinctive designs to prevent confusion. The two-penny stamp, introduced that year, featured a blue color and a similar profile of the Queen, but with subtle differences in the background hatching pattern. The four-penny stamp, also introduced in 1855, was printed in red. The six-penny stamp was lilac. The 10-penny stamp was brown. Each denomination maintained the same basic portrait, but employed different background patterns and colors to facilitate easy identification. These color choices were not arbitrary. Postal authorities conducted studies to determine which colors remained most distinguishable under various lighting conditions. The selected colors represented optimal choices for visibility and differentiation. In 1864, a new series of stamps was introduced featuring larger denominations suitable for parcel post. These included stamps valued at 9 pence, 1 shilling, 2 shillings, 5 shillings, and 10 shillings. The higher value stamps featured more elaborate border designs commensurate with their greater monetary value. The 5-shilling stamp was particularly notable for its size and detail. It measured nearly twice the dimensions of the standard penny red and featured an intricate frame surrounding the Queen's portrait. The printing process for these high-value stamps involved additional steps to enhance security features. Watermarks evolved over time as well. Early stamps used a simple crown watermark. Later issues incorporated more complex watermarks featuring crown and anchor designs or patterns of letters. These watermarks served as anti-counterfeiting measures. The production of watermark paper required specialized equipment. Paper mills contracted by the Postal Service maintained dedicated production lines for postal stationery. The watermarking process involved pressing a design into the paper pulp, using a dandy roll during the paper-making process. Quality control of watermarked paper involved regular inspections. Samples from each production batch were examined under magnification to ensure that watermarks appeared clearly and consistently. Batches failing inspection standards were rejected and required remanufacturing. Commemorative stamps, as we understand them today, did not exist during most of Victoria's reign. The first commemorative issue in Britain did not appear until 1924, well after the Victorian period. During Victoria's time, stamps served purely functional purposes. However, the Postal Service did produce special stamps for specific uses. For instance, official stamps were created for government correspondence. These stamps featured the letters V and R, representing Victoria Regina, in the corners. Telegraph stamps represented another specialized category. The telegraph service, operated by the Postal Service after 1870, required payment. Telegraph stamps, printed in distinctive colors and patterns, served this purpose. These stamps were not valid for regular postal use. Postal orders, introduced in 1881, provided a means of sending money through the mail. These documents incorporated printed stamps as part of their design. The stamps on postal orders could not be removed and used for regular postage, as they were an integral part of the order document. The administration of stamp production involved multiple government offices. The Treasury Department maintained oversight of monetary aspects, while the Postal Service managed practical considerations of design and distribution. Contracts for stamp printing were awarded through competitive tender processes. Printing firms submitted bids, and contracts were typically awarded for multi-year periods. The selected printer was required to maintain strict security protocols and to account for every sheet of stamps produced. Unused stamps represented monetary value and required careful inventory management. Postal offices maintained secure storage for stamp stock. Clerks responsible for stamp stock. Clerks responsible for stamp sales were required to account for all stamps in their custody. At the end of each business day, receipts from stamp sales were reconciled against the inventory. Discrepancies in stamp inventory triggered investigations. Missing stamps were treated as potential theft, and responsible clerks faced serious consequences if they could not adequately explain shortages. Procedures for handling stamp inventory were documented in detailed regulations that clerks were required to study and follow precisely. This concludes our examination of Victorian postal regulations, stamp classifications, and delivery procedures. We have covered the essential administrative frameworks that govern postal operations during this period. The information presented tonight has been, as intended, thoroughly unremarkable and extensively detailed. May you rest well.